My name is Angelica Miller, 32 years old, and 6 months ago, I was publicly humiliated in front of every important person in my industry. Picture this: the annual shareholder meeting of TechVision, the company I helped build from scratch over 7 years. My boss Marcus standing over me, his face twisted with contempt. "Dumbass, you should have read the fine print." Everyone laughed. They actually applauded when he fired me, but I knew something they didn't. Before I share what happened next, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe for more workplace justice stories. I graduated from MIT with honors in computer engineering. Not just any honors, but top of my class. I was recruited by several tech giants before I even finished my final semester. Google, Apple, Microsoft, you name it. But I chose TechVision because it was a startup with vision and potential. Back then, Marcus Wright seemed like a visionary leader who valued innovation above all else. The company had just secured its Series A funding, and I was employee number 12. From day one, I poured my heart and soul into TechVision. While others worked standard 40-hour weeks, I regularly clocked 80 hours or more. I wasn't just committed, I was obsessed with creating something revolutionary. Our core product was a predictive analytics engine for healthcare systems. My contribution: I designed the neural network architecture that formed the backbone of our entire system. The algorithm I created could predict patient readmissions with 98% accuracy, something no other system on the market could achieve. Within 3 years, I was promoted to lead developer. My team expanded from 3 to 20 engineers, all brilliant minds who respected my technical expertise. Together, we filed 14 patents under TechVision's name, 7 of which I was the primary inventor. Our valuation skyrocketed from $5 million to $200 million, largely on the strength of my innovations. The first signs of trouble appeared during our Series C funding round 4 years into my time at TechVision. Marcus began taking credit for my work during investor presentations. At first, I brushed it off as standard CEO behavior. He needed to be the face of the company, I told myself. But the pattern became increasingly troubling. "The neural architecture was my brainchild," he told a group of venture capitalists, while I sat silently in the corner of the room. "I sketched it on a napkin one night, and my team simply implemented my vision." That was a blatant lie. I had the original whiteboard photos to prove it was my design, developed over 3 months of intense work. When I confronted Marcus privately about this, his response chilled me. "Nobody invests in a company because of some female coder," he said dismissively. "They invest in me, my vision. You're just a tool to implement it. Know your place." The toxic environment escalated gradually. Marcus began excluding me from key meetings. My budget requests were denied or delayed. New male engineers with half my experience were given priority on projects I should have led. During my annual review, despite delivering the core technology for our newest product line, I received the smallest bonus percentage on the executive team. Rebecca Chen, my closest ally at the company and fellow senior developer, warned me during a private lunch. "Marcus has been meeting with that hotshot from Stanford, Jake Peterson. I think he's planning to replace you." "Why would he do that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Our latest release increased customer retention by 40%, and that was my redesign of the recommendation engine. Rebecca looked around the restaurant before leaning in. "He told the board you're difficult to work with and your code is becoming unstable. It's all lies, but he's building a case. I'd watch your back." That night, I did something I should have done years earlier. I pulled out my employment contract and read every single line, including the fine print in the appendices. Most of it was standard legal boilerplate, but in Section 4, Clause B, I found something extraordinary. "Upon termination of employment, for any reason other than criminal misconduct, all intellectual property developed primarily by the employee that has not been fully integrated into company products shall revert to the employee's ownership." I stared at that sentence for 10 minutes straight. Could this really mean what I thought it meant? The next day, I took a personal day off and met with an attorney specializing in intellectual property law. "This is unusual," Attorney Caroline Weber said, adjusting her glasses as she studied my contract. "Most companies have ironclad IP agreements that give them perpetual ownership. Someone made a serious oversight in drafting this." "Is it legally enforceable?" I asked. "Absolutely. And given your description of your role in developing these technologies, you could potentially claim ownership of significant portions of their IP portfolio if they terminate you." Over the next month, I meticulously documented everything, I compiled emails proving my authorship of key algorithms. I gathered performance reviews highlighting my contributions. I backed up Git commits, showing my code contributions. I even recorded meetings where my work was discussed, all single-party consent and legal in our state. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his campaign against me. Tasks that had been mine for years were reassigned. My team members were gradually moved to other projects. In meetings, my input was ignored or dismissed. The writing was on the wall. Rather than resign as Marcus clearly hoped I would, I stayed. I continued producing excellent work while documenting everything. I knew what was coming, and for perhaps the first time in my professional life, I was prepared for the worst. The annual shareholder meeting of TechVision was always a lavish affair. This year was no exception, with the event held in the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria in Manhattan. 500 attendees filled the room: board members, major investors, industry analysts, tech journalists, and employees who had earned the privilege to attend. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead while waitstaff in crisp uniforms circulated with champagne. I arrived early, dressed in my most professional attire, a tailored navy blue suit, minimal jewelry, and hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. My hands trembled slightly as I checked my phone one last time to ensure everything was prepared. The encrypted cloud folder containing all my documentation was ready, accessible with one tap if needed. Rebecca found me near the refreshment table. "You look pale," she whispered. "Everything okay?" "Just nervous about the product roadmap presentation," I lied. I hadn't told her about my suspicions or preparations. The fewer people who knew, the better. At precisely 2 o'clock, the lights dimmed, and Marcus strode onto the stage like a rock star, taking his rightful place. At 45, he cut an impressive figure in his bespoke suit with just enough gray at his temples to suggest wisdom without age. "Welcome to the future." His booming voice filled the room without needing a microphone. "Today, I'm proud to announce that TechVision isn't just meeting expectations, we're shattering them." The crowd erupted in applause as Marcus launched into his presentation. Charts and graphs projected behind him showed our meteoric growth: revenue up 65% year-over-year, customer acquisition costs down 30%, user base tripled in 18 months. "Our proprietary neural architecture," Marcus continued, "which I developed with our engineering team, has revolutionized how healthcare providers predict patient outcomes." I clenched my jaw at the blatant lie. That architecture was entirely my creation, developed during countless late nights when Marcus was attending industry parties. For 45 minutes, Marcus detailed every company achievement, systematically erasing my contributions from the narrative. According to his version, all innovations sprang from his brilliant mind, with the engineering team merely implementing his vision. Not once did he mention my name, despite my role as lead developer on every major feature he praised. Then, just as he seemed to be wrapping up, Marcus paused dramatically. "Before we move to questions, there's one more announcement I need to make. A difficult one, but necessary for our continued growth." My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Could Angelica Miller please join me on stage?" A spotlight swung to find me in the audience. 500 pairs of eyes turned in my direction. On shaky legs, I made my way to the stage, hyper-aware of the whispers following in my wake. As I approached, Marcus's smile never reached his eyes. "Angelica has been with TechVision for 7 years, he announced to the crowd, "and during that time she's made contributions." The pause was calculated, dismissive. Unfortunately, as companies evolve, so must their talent. What works in a startup environment doesn't always scale to an enterprise organization. Confusion rippled through the audience. I stood rigid, hands clasped tightly in front of me to hide their trembling. Recent code audits have revealed significant architectural issues in systems Miss Miller has overseen. Technical debt that threatens our ability to scale. After careful consideration, the executive team has unanimously decided that a change in technical leadership is required. The blood drained from my face. He was firing me. Publicly. In front of everyone who mattered in our industry. Effective immediately, Angelica Miller is no longer employed by TechVision. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. But Marcus wasn't finished with his humiliation. "We've already hired a Stanford PhD to rebuild what Miss Miller has frankly botched over the past year. Jake Peterson brings fresh thinking and world-class expertise that we desperately need." Jake stood up from his front row seat, waving confidently at the crowd. He couldn't have been older than 26. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Marcus stepped forward, physically imposing himself between me and the microphone. When Miss Miller was informed of our concerns in private meetings, she demonstrated precisely the attitude problem that has become her hallmark: defensive, argumentative, unable to accept constructive feedback. This was an outright lie. There had been no such meetings, no warnings, no opportunity to address any concerns, real or fabricated. Then came the final blow. Perhaps if she'd been less focused on office politics and more attentive to her actual responsibilities, she might have read her performance requirements more carefully, or at least the fine print of what happens when those requirements aren't met. Marcus turned to face me directly, no longer addressing the crowd, but ensuring they could hear every word. "Dumbass, you should have read the fine print." Laughter erupted from several tables near the front, primarily from the sales executives who comprised Marcus's inner circle. To my horror, scattered applause followed, growing as more people joined in not wanting to be seen opposing the CEO's decision. A security guard appeared at the steps to the stage, ready to escort me out like a criminal. The room spun around me as waves of humiliation washed over my body. 7 years of dedication, thousands of hours of brilliant work, all erased in a 3-minute character assassination. But something deep inside me refused to crumble. A cold clarity replaced the burning shame. I had prepared for this moment. I had read the fine print, just not the sections Marcus thought mattered. As the security guard reached for my elbow, I shook him off with a calm I didn't know I possessed, and returned to my seat rather than heading for the exit. Marcus's triumphant expression faltered momentarily at this departure from his script. "Miss Miller, the meeting continues as a closed session for current employees and stakeholders only," he said, the microphone amplifying his impatience. I remained seated back, straight eyes forward. The room grew uncomfortable as the standoff continued. Marcus signaled to the security guard, who started toward me again. "Before I go," I said loudly, my voice carrying across the now silent ballroom, "I believe it would be beneficial for everyone here to understand the full implications of my termination." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Even Marcus seemed temporarily at a loss for words, clearly not expecting resistance to his public execution. "Daniel Evans." I called out, my voice remarkably steady. "As General Counsel of TechVision, would you please read Section 4, Clause B, of the Standard Employment Contract?" Daniel, a tall, silver-haired man in his 50s, hesitated in his seat near the executive table. His eyes darted to Marcus, seeking direction. "This is inappropriate and unnecessary," Marcus declared, regaining his composure. "Security will now escort Miss Miller from the premises. I believe shareholders might be interested in understanding certain contractual obligations that affect company assets." I countered, raising my voice to be heard over Marcus's attempts to dismiss me, particularly those regarding intellectual property rights upon termination. Several board members leaned forward in their seats. Michael Stewart, the most senior board member and former tech executive himself, raised his hand. "I would like to hear this clause," he stated authoritatively. "Daniel, please read it for the record." Marcus's face flushed with anger, but he could hardly overrule a founding board member. Daniel reluctantly approached the microphone at the side of the stage, removing a small leather-bound notebook from his jacket pocket. He flipped through it, found the relevant page, and cleared his throat nervously. "Section 4, Clause B," he began, his professional tone belying the tension in the room. "Upon termination of employment for any reason other than criminal misconduct, all intellectual property developed primarily by the employee that has not been fully integrated into company products shall revert to the employee's ownership." He paused, the implications of the words sinking in. When he looked up, the color had drained from his face. His eyes met mine, then darted to Marcus, whose confident smirk was rapidly fading. "Could you clarify what constitutes not fully integrated, Daniel?" I asked innocently. Daniel swallowed hard before continuing. "According to the definitions section of the contract, fully integrated means incorporated into a shipping product with all patent applications completed and assigned. Intellectual property still in development, beta testing, or without completed patent assignment would not qualify as fully integrated." Murmurs swept through the audience as the implications became clear. The neural network architecture underpinning our latest product line, including the enhancements I'd developed over the past 18 months, had not yet been included in any shipping product. The patents were filed but not yet granted, Under the terms I just had read aloud, ownership would revert to me upon my termination. This is absurd, Marcus sputtered into the microphone. A simple contractual technicality doesn't override standard industry practice. All work done by employees belongs to the company. Period. Actually, Michael Stewart interjected, rising from his seat. Contracts exist precisely to define the specifics of employment relationships. If this clause exists in Miss Miller's contract, it bears serious consideration. He turned toward the corporate counsel. Daniel, was this clause standard in all employment contracts, or unique to Miss Miller's? Daniel appeared physically ill as he answered. It was included in our standard contract template for the first 3 years of operation. It was removed in later versions, but early employees like Miss Miller would have this clause in their agreements. Marcus strode across the stage, gesturing wildly. This is nothing but a desperate attempt by a terminated employee to create leverage. The intellectual property in question was developed as work for hire using company resources on company time. That's true, I acknowledged calmly. But the contract doesn't make those distinctions. It simply states that IP primarily developed by the employee reverts upon termination. As primary architect and inventor of record on 7 pending patents, including the core predictive algorithm powering HealthGuard 2, I believe the clause applies. The room erupted in chaotic discussion. Investors turned to each other in alarm. Board members huddled together in urgent consultation. Marcus gestured frantically for Daniel to join him at the side of the stage, their heated whispers just visible from where I sat. After several minutes of growing disorder, Michael Stewart stood again. I believe we need to pause the public portion of this meeting to address these contractual questions. I move that we call an immediate executive session of the board. Seconded, called another board member. Security, Marcus barked, ensure that Miss Miller remains in the building. She is not to leave with any company property, including any digital files or records. 2 guards positioned themselves near me as the board members filed out through a side door. The remaining audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing corporate drama far more compelling than the dry presentations they had expected. Rebecca slid into the seat next to me as the room broke into clusters of urgent conversation. "What the hell just happened?" she whispered. "Did you know about this clause?" I nodded slightly. I've been preparing for this for months. Marcus has been trying to push me out and take credit for my work. I just made sure I wouldn't leave empty-handed. They're going to fight this with everything they have, she warned. The core algorithm is valued at millions in the last valuation report. I know. I checked my phone, ensuring my documentation was still readily accessible. But I have evidence proving I was the primary developer. Git commits, email trails, whiteboard photos, meeting recordings where Marcus himself attributes the design to me while speaking to the engineering team. Rebecca's eyes widened. You recorded meetings. Single-party consent state, I reminded her. Perfectly legal. After 30 tense minutes, a junior staff member approached me. Miss Miller, the board requests your presence in conference room A. I stood straight in my jacket and followed him through the maze of corridors to a large conference room where the entire board sat around a mahogany table. Marcus stood at the far end, his face a mask of barely contained fury. Daniel sat nearby, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and 2 junior attorneys furiously taking notes. Michael Stewart gestured to an empty chair. Miss Miller, please join us. We'd like to discuss a resolution to this situation. As I took my seat, I noticed the atmosphere had shifted. The initial shock had given way to calculation. These were business people after all. They were already thinking of damage control and cost-benefit analyses. After reviewing your contract, Daniel began, his tone professionally detached. We acknowledge that Clause 4B does exist in your agreement. However, we believe its application is limited in scope and does not cover major company assets developed as part of your normal job duties. I disagree, I replied calmly. The language is quite clear. I have documentation proving I was the primary developer of the neural architecture, the predictive algorithm, and the adaptive learning framework. None of these have been fully integrated into shipping products per the contract definition. This is ridiculous, Marcus exploded, pounding his fist on the table. You're trying to hold the company hostage over a contractual loophole. A loophole your legal team created, and you triggered by firing me publicly without cause, I countered. I didn't ask to be terminated. I was performing my duties exceptionally well, as my performance reviews clearly indicate. I withdrew my tablet and opened a folder. I have copies of all relevant documentation, establishing my role as primary developer. I'm prepared to provide these to the board for review. For the next hour, we engaged in a tense back and forth. The board offered a modest severance package in exchange for waiving any claims under Clause 4B. I countered with a demand for full recognition as inventor and a significant equity stake in the technologies I developed. As discussions stalled, there was a knock at the door. Jennifer Adams, a prominent venture capitalist whose firm had been courting TechVision for its next funding round, asked to speak with me privately. "I'm impressed by your preparation," she said when we stepped outside, "and frankly by the quality of your technical work. If you retain rights to these algorithms, I'd be interested in discussing funding options for your next venture." When we returned to the conference room, my resolve was strengthened. The board sensed the shift in leverage and began making more substantial offers. Throughout it all, Marcus grew increasingly agitated, eventually resorting to personal attacks. "This is exactly why women don't succeed in tech," he spat. "Emotional, vindictive behavior when things don't go their way." The room fell silent at this naked display of sexism. Michael Stewart cleared his throat uncomfortably. "That's enough, Marcus. Miss Miller is exercising her contractual rights, which is hardly an emotional response." As the night wore on, it became clear that no resolution would be reached immediately. The company needed time to assess the full implications, and I was in no rush to settle. What had begun as my public humiliation had transformed into a strategic standoff with millions of dollars and the company's future hanging in the balance. 3 days after the shareholder meeting, I received a formal letter requesting my presence at TechVision headquarters for continued negotiations. During those 72 hours, I'd barely slept, alternating between anxiety validation and careful preparation, with my newly hired legal team, funded by a retainer from Jennifer Adams' venture capital firm. The atmosphere in the executive conference room was markedly different from our last encounter. Marcus was conspicuously absent. Michael Stewart led the meeting, flanked by Daniel Evans and Amanda Parker, the HR director who had failed to address the toxic culture that had flourished under Marcus's leadership. "We've completed our preliminary review of the situation." Michael began, his tone businesslike but no longer dismissive. "Our legal team confirms that Clause 4B does indeed create significant complications regarding ownership of certain intellectual properties." Daniel slid a document across the table. "We've prepared a settlement offer that we believe recognizes your contributions while protecting the company's core business interests." I scanned the document with my attorney, Catherine Winters, at my side. The offer was substantially better than their initial proposal: a 7-figure severance package, continued health benefits for 1 year, and a consulting role that would allow the company to continue using my algorithms. "This isn't sufficient," Catherine stated firmly. "My client was the primary architect of technologies valued at approximately $200 million in your last funding round. This offer represents less than 2% of that value." "Those valuations assume the technologies remain under TechVision's control," Amanda countered. "Standalone, they're worth considerably less." Perhaps I interjected, but Jennifer Adams disagrees. "Sequoia Capital is prepared to fund a new venture based solely on these technologies with a pre-money valuation of $70 million. Michael's eyebrows shot up at the mention of the prestigious VC firm. "You've been busy." "I've been underestimated," I corrected him. "I'm not just some female coder, as Marcus so eloquently put it. I'm an innovator who was systematically marginalized while creating the very products driving this company's valuation." The negotiations stretched for hours. Lunch was brought in, then dinner. Lawyers and executives came and went. Phone calls were made to board members and major investors. Through it all, I maintained my position. I wanted full ownership of the neural architecture I'd designed, and fair compensation for the years it had been used without proper attribution. "What about a structured deal?" Michael eventually proposed. "TechVision retains license to use existing implementations, while you retain ownership of the underlying patents and future developments." It was the first suggestion that acknowledged the fundamental issue: my intellectual contribution and right to control my innovations. We spent the next 3 hours hammering out details, percentages, and terms. As we approached midnight, the conference room door burst open. Marcus stormed in, disheveled and clearly furious. "This is corporate suicide," he shouted, glaring at the board members present. "You're letting this junior engineer blackmail the entire company." Marcus, this doesn't concern you anymore, Michael said firmly. Doesn't concern me. I built this company. Everything we've achieved has been under my leadership. I couldn't help myself. Is that what you call taking credit for other people's work? Leadership? Marcus turned his rage toward me. You ungrateful little bitch. I gave you opportunities no one else would. Without me, you'd still be coding in some basement. The room fell silent at his outburst. Amanda Parker shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Daniel stared at his legal pad, making unnecessary notes. Michael stood up. Marcus, you were explicitly instructed not to participate in these negotiations. Your comments are inappropriate and potentially actionable. I'm asking you to leave immediately. You can't sideline me from my own company, Marcus protested. Actually, we can, Michael replied calmly. The board voted this morning to place you on administrative leave, pending review of your management practices following Miss Miller's allegations and supporting documentation. I hadn't expected this development. Apparently, my carefully compiled evidence of Marcus's behavior had made an impact beyond the intellectual property dispute. Marcus pointed at me, hands shaking with rage. This isn't over. You think you can walk away with my technology. I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. Your technology, I repeated, maintaining my composure. Strange, since I have recordings of you telling the engineering team, and I quote, Angelica designed this architecture from scratch. I don't understand half of what she's done, but it works brilliantly. End quote. From the February product review meeting. Marcus's face turned an alarming shade of purple. For a moment I thought he might physically attack me. Instead, he knocked over a chair and stormed out, slamming the door so hard that a framed company mission statement fell from the wall, its glass shattering on the floor. A fitting metaphor, I thought. After Marcus's departure, the negotiations proceeded more smoothly. By 2 a.m, we had the framework of an agreement I would retain ownership of the core intellectual property with TechVision, receiving a non-exclusive license for current implementations. I would receive compensation for past usage plus equity in TechVision to recognize my contributions to existing products. As we prepared to conclude for the night, Jennifer Adams, who had joined for the final hours, posed a question. What are your plans for these technologies going forward, Angelica? I hadn't allowed myself to think that far ahead, focused as I was on securing what was rightfully mine. But the answer came easily. I'm going to build something better, something that serves patients rather than just shareholders. The original vision of TechVision before it became all about valuation and Marcus's ego. Jennifer smiled. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Let's talk tomorrow about making that happen. As I left the building at nearly 3 a.m, exhausted but triumphant, I realized the power had shifted. Not just legally or financially, but fundamentally. For years I had allowed Marcus to diminish my contributions and take credit for my innovations. That dynamic had been permanently altered. I was no longer just a female coder to be exploited and discarded. I was Angelica Miller, rightful owner of groundbreaking technology and soon to be founder of my own company. The public humiliation Marcus had orchestrated had backfired spectacularly, becoming instead the catalyst for my liberation. The weeks following the negotiation were among the most challenging of my life. Despite the favorable framework we'd established, finalizing the legal details dragged on as TechVision's attorneys fought for every comma and clause. Marcus, though officially on leave, worked behind the scenes to undermine the agreement and my reputation. Tech industry blogs began publishing thinly sourced articles, questioning my contributions and character. Sources close to TechVision management described me as difficult, technically limited, and opportunistic. One particularly vicious piece suggested I had used personal relationships rather than technical skills to advance my career. I maintained a strategic silence through it all, refusing interview requests and declining to respond to the smear campaign. My attorney advised that engaging would only extend the news cycle and potentially complicate the ongoing negotiations. Sarah, my younger sister and closest confidant, became my emotional anchor during this turbulent time. She flew in from Chicago and stayed in my apartment for 2 weeks, forcing me to eat properly and occasionally step away from my constant planning and legal consultations. You look like you haven't slept in days, she commented one evening, as we sat on my balcony, the San Francisco skyline glittering before us. This victory won't mean much if you work yourself into a breakdown. It's not just about winning anymore, I confessed. It's about what comes next. I have this incredible opportunity, but also enormous pressure. Jennifer's firm is ready to invest $7 million in my new company, but that means I have to actually build something successful. If anyone can do it, it's you, Sarah said confidently. You built TechVision's technology from scratch while that jerk took all the credit. Imagine what you'll create when you're actually recognized for your work. Her faith in me was touching, but the reality was more complicated. Starting a company meant building a team, defining a vision, managing people, and expectations, not just coding brilliant algorithms. I had always been more comfortable with code than corporate politics. During this period of uncertainty, I received an unexpected call from Thomas Reynolds, CEO of Meditech, one of TechVision's main competitors. I've been following your situation with interest, he said after preliminaries. We've always been impressed with TechVision's predictive technologies. Now that I understand who was really behind them, I'd like to discuss opportunities at Meditech. The offer was flattering, but limited a senior developer position reporting to their CTO, with compensation well below what my innovations were worth. I appreciate the interest, I told him, but I'm exploring founding my own venture. Starting a company is incredibly difficult, he cautioned. 90% fail within the first year. With us, you'd have resources, stability, and a proven market position. And who would own the intellectual property I develop? I asked pointedly. His hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Meditech would retain standard ownership rights, of course. That's industry standard. Not in my industry, not anymore, I replied politely, declining his offer. The truth was, Thomas's offer represented exactly what I was fighting against: the undervaluation of technical innovation and the expectation that I should be grateful for any recognition at all, even if it meant surrendering ownership of my creations. 4 weeks after the shareholder meeting debacle, with legal negotiations still ongoing, Jennifer Adams arranged a dinner meeting at her firm's offices. To my surprise, Blake Davidson was also present. Blake had founded and successfully exited 2 healthcare startups and was known for his ethical approach to business. I've reviewed your technical documentation, Blake said after introductions. Your neural architecture is genuinely revolutionary, but what impresses me more is how you've thought about its application. Your notes on patient-centered implementation show you're thinking beyond just technical elegance. Jennifer nodded in agreement. We believe there's an opportunity here that goes beyond just commercializing your existing technology. Healthcare AI has become a crowded space, but most companies are focused on cost reduction for providers rather than actual patient outcomes. For the next 3 hours, the three of us discussed possibilities. Blake's experience complemented my technical expertise, while Jennifer provided insights into market dynamics and funding strategies. By the end of the evening, a vision for Phoenix Health AI had taken shape, a company focused on using adaptive learning algorithms to improve patient care rather than simply reduce hospital costs. I want to be clear about one thing, I stated as we prepared to leave. Any company we build will have proper attribution and ownership protections for everyone involved. No one's contributions will be erased or appropriated. Blake smiled. I wouldn't have it any other way. The best innovation happens when people feel secure in their recognition and rewards. 2 days later, I signed the final settlement with TechVision. The terms were more favorable than I could have imagined when this journey began. Full ownership of my neural architecture, patents, a substantial financial settlement for past usage, and a clean break that allowed me to pursue my new venture. Immediately. Marcus, I later learned, had been permanently removed as CEO following a board investigation that uncovered not just his treatment of me, but a pattern of similar behavior toward other female employees and systematic credit appropriation. The company announced his departure as a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities, but industry insiders knew the truth. With the legal battles behind me and funding secured, Phoenix Health AI officially launched in a small office in Palo Alto. Blake came on as co-founder and COO, handling business operations, while I focused on technology development. Our first hire was Rebecca, who resigned from TechVision the day after we received our initial funding. I always knew you were the real genius behind those systems, she told me on her first day. Working for you directly is going to be amazing. Not for me, I corrected her. With me. At Phoenix, everyone gets credit for their contributions. Those early months were exhilarating and exhausting. I rebuilt my core algorithms from scratch, enhancing them with features I had conceptualized at TechVision, but never had the freedom to implement. Our small team expanded to 15 people, each selected not just for their technical skills, but for their commitment to our patient-centered approach. 6 months after being publicly fired and humiliated, Phoenix Health AI completed its first working prototype. Our system outperformed TechVision's in every benchmark test, with 30% better prediction accuracy and significantly reduced false positives. The healthcare providers in our beta program reported unprecedented satisfaction with the system's adaptability to their specific patient populations. As we prepared for our official product launch, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The journey from employee to founder, from having my contributions erased to directing my own vision, had transformed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was no longer just a brilliant engineer hiding behind my code. I had become a leader, an advocate, and a voice for change in an industry that desperately needed it. 1 year to the day after Marcus had fired me on that shareholder meeting stage, I stood at a different podium. The annual Healthcare Innovation Summit had selected Phoenix Health AI as a featured presenter, and the main conference hall was filled to capacity with healthcare executives, technologists, and investors. Predictive healthcare isn't just about algorithms, I explained to the attentive audience. It's about understanding the human patterns that algorithms can't easily detect. Our system doesn't just predict patient outcomes, it learns from the expertise of healthcare providers to continuously improve those predictions. The presentation included live demonstrations of our system identifying at-risk patients that competing systems had missed, alongside testimonials from doctors at our partner hospitals. When I concluded, the applause was thunderous. Not performative applause for a powerful CEO, but genuine appreciation for innovation that could save lives. As I stepped away from the podium, Jennifer Adams squeezed my arm. "Check your phone," she whispered. I glanced at my notifications to see a breaking news alert from TechCrunch: TechVision stock plummets 20% after failed product launch. Later that evening, I read the full story in my hotel room. TechVision's attempt to recreate my algorithms had resulted in a system with significant accuracy problems. Their hurried launch of HealthGuard 3 had been marred by embarrassing errors during a live demonstration, with the system failing to predict obvious risk factors that any first-year medical student would have caught. I felt no joy in their failure, only validation of what I had known all along. The technology I had developed wasn't easily replicated even by the company that had once owned it. In their rush to prove they could succeed without me, they had exposed the emptiness of Marcus's claims about his technical vision. The contrast between our trajectories continued to sharpen over the following months. Phoenix secured a $25 million Series A funding round at a valuation of $100 million. Meanwhile, TechVision struggled to retain clients who were increasingly attracted to our superior product. Former colleagues began reaching out, testing the waters about joining Phoenix. I was selective in my hiring, welcoming those who had shown integrity during my time at TechVision, while declining those who had actively participated in the toxic culture Marcus had fostered. The most satisfying moment came during the West Coast Medical Technology Conference. I was discussing our latest research with a group of hospital administrators when a familiar voice called my name. "Angelica, wonderful presentation earlier." I turned to see Marcus Wright himself, smiling as though we were old friends. He had lost weight, and his designer suit hung slightly loose on his frame. The confidence that had once bordered on arrogance had diminished, replaced by an almost desperate affability. "Thank you, Marcus," I replied, neutrally conscious of the observers around us. "Your new company is doing remarkably well," he continued. "I always knew you had potential. That's why I hired you at TechVision in the first place." The revisionist history was breathtaking in its audacity. Several people who knew our actual history exchanged glances. "How is TechVision doing these days?" I asked innocently. His smile tightened. "A transitional period. The board lacks vision, too focused on quarterly results rather than long-term innovation." He lowered his voice, leaning closer. "Actually, I've been meaning to reach out. I have a new venture in mind, and someone with your technical background would be an ideal partner. We made a great team once." I almost laughed at the sheer nerve. "I think you've misremembered our working relationship, Marcus. You took credit for my work, marginalized my contributions, and then fired me publicly while calling me a dumbass. That's not typically how great teams operate." His face flushed. That was a regrettable misunderstanding. Heat of the moment. It was a revealing moment, I corrected him. One that ultimately did me a favor. Phoenix would never exist if you hadn't so thoroughly underestimated me. Before he could respond, Rebecca appeared at my side. "Angelica, the Hopkins team is ready for our meeting." As I excused myself, I saw something I never thought I'd witness. Marcus Wright, self-proclaimed tech visionary, watching me walk away with the clear knowledge that our positions had irreversibly reversed. He was now the one seeking opportunities while I was the founder of the industry's rising star. The following week brought news that TechVision was in acquisition talks with the expected purchase price approximately 1/5 of their valuation when I had been fired. Their core technology, stripped of my ongoing innovation, had failed to keep pace with market demands. Phoenix, meanwhile, continued its ascent. We secured our first major hospital chain contract, implementing our system across 23 facilities nationwide. Patient readmission rates dropped by 17% in the first quarter of implementation, saving lives and millions of dollars in unnecessary treatments. Rebecca, now our chief technology officer, burst into my office one afternoon, waving her tablet. "Have you seen this?" she asked, practically vibrating with excitement. It was an industry analysis piece titled, "The Rise of Phoenix: How Angelica Miller Revolutionized Healthcare AI After Being Fired from TechVision." The article detailed my journey from lead developer to founder, positioning the story as emblematic of broader issues in tech: the appropriation of women's contributions, the importance of intellectual property protections, and the fader HEZ, innovation that can flourish when diverse voices are truly heard. "They're calling you a tech feminist icon," Rebecca noted. "How does it feel?" I considered the question seriously. Complicated. I never set out to be an icon. I just wanted recognition for my work and the freedom to build something meaningful. "Well, you've achieved both," she pointed out, "and inspired a lot of people in the process." That night, I received an email that brought the journey full circle. It was from Daniel Evans, TechVision's former general counsel. "Angelica, with the acquisition of TechVision finalized, I'm leaving the company and wanted to reach out personally. I failed in my duty to create a fair workplace where contributions were properly recognized and protected. The clause that ultimately protected your work was actually intended to be removed from all contracts, but due to my department's oversight, it remained in yours. Sometimes justice arrives through unusual channels. What you've built with Phoenix exemplifies what TechVision could have been if we had truly valued all our innovators. Wishing you continued success, Daniel." I read the email twice, struck by the irony. The very oversight that Marcus had mocked me for not reading closely enough had been an oversight by TechVision itself, one that had ultimately led to its downfall and my ascension. Sometimes justice does arrive through unusual channels. It's been 18 months since that fateful shareholder meeting where Marcus tried to destroy my career. As I look out from my corner office at Phoenix Health AI's new headquarters in Silicon Valley, watching our team of 75 talented individuals collaborating in the open workspace, I barely recognize the woman I was then. The journey to this point required more than just professional rebuilding. The emotional toll of public humiliation, character assassination, and protracted legal battles created wounds that needed healing alongside the professional victories. For the first few months after launching Phoenix, I threw myself into work with singular focus, often sleeping in my office and forgetting to eat regular meals. Sarah called it my revenge by success phase. She wasn't entirely wrong. Part of me wanted to build Phoenix into a billion-dollar company just to prove how catastrophically Marcus had misjudged my worth. But operating from a place of anger and vindication wasn't sustainable. During a weekend retreat organized by Jennifer for Phoenix's leadership team, a consultant specialized in executive psychology helped me recognize that I was still giving Marcus power over my choices by defining success as his failure. "What would success look like if Marcus and TechVision had never existed?" she asked me during a private session. "What would you build if you were motivated purely by your own vision rather than reaction to past injustice?" That question catalyzed a profound shift in my approach. I began redefining Phoenix not as the company born from TechVision's mistreatment, but as the company that was always meant to exist. My experience with Marcus became merely an obstacle I had overcome, rather than the defining element of my professional identity. This mental reframing transformed how I led the company. Rather than focusing on outperforming TechVision at any cost, we concentrated on creating something genuinely revolutionary. Our company culture emphasized three core principles: innovation with integrity, proper attribution for all contributions and technology that served humanity, rather than merely generating profit. Every employee at Phoenix received equity in the company, ensuring they benefited directly from the value they helped create. We implemented transparent salary structures to eliminate the gender and racial pay gaps that plague the tech industry. Performance evaluations included peer recognition components, making it impossible for anyone's contributions to be erased or appropriated. 6 months ago, we launched a mentorship program specifically designed to support women and underrepresented minorities in technical roles. The Ascension Initiative, as we called it, paired promising junior developers with senior mentors both within Phoenix and from our network of industry partners. When I was starting out, I had to navigate toxic environments and fight for recognition without support, I explained at the launch event. Imagine how much more innovation we'll see when talented people can focus on creating rather than surviving. The program quickly became oversubscribed, revealing the enormous unmet need for supportive professional development in the tech world. We expanded it twice in the first quarter, with several major tech companies reaching out to learn from our approach. Our technical innovations continued alongside our cultural ones. Phoenix's predictive healthcare platform now serves 47 hospital systems across the country, with international expansion beginning in Canada and the United Kingdom. Independent studies confirm our system reduces readmissions by 23% and improves early intervention rates for high-risk patients by 31%. Last week brought news that TechVision, now a small division of the conglomerate that acquired it, was being shuttered entirely. The intellectual property I hadn't taken with me was deemed obsolete, and the remaining team disbanded. Marcus, I heard through industry channels, had launched a small consulting firm that was struggling to gain traction. The news should have felt triumphant, but instead I felt a strange sense of closure. The company that had been the site of both my professional growth and deepest professional wounds no longer existed. The slate was clean. This morning, as I walked through our lobby, I noticed Daniel Evans waiting by reception. Now, retired from corporate law, he had agreed to speak to our legal team about creating truly equitable intellectual property agreements. "Angelica," he greeted me warmly. "Your new offices are impressive." "Thank you for coming," I replied, genuinely pleased to see him. "Your insights will be valuable to our team." As we walked toward the conference room, he paused. "I wanted to say something personally before the meeting. I failed you at TechVision. I saw what was happening with Marcus taking credit for your work, but I did nothing. The legal department should have been a safeguard against such abuses, not an enabler." His candor surprised me. "You were doing your job as you understood it." "That's just it," he said, shaking his head. "I misunderstood my job. I thought it was protecting the company when it should have been protecting the integrity of the company, which includes how it treats its innovators." "Well, you're helping to create a better standard now," I assured him. "That matters." After his presentation to our legal team, I invited Daniel to tour our development floor, where engineers and medical professionals worked side by side to refine our algorithms based on real-world clinical feedback. "This is how healthcare technology should be developed," he observed. "Collaborative, transparent, patient-focused." "It's how all technology should be developed," I corrected him. "The lone genius inventor is largely a myth. Innovation happens in community with diverse perspectives and proper attribution." As Daniel departed, I found myself reflecting on the long journey from that humiliating moment on stage to the thriving company I now led. The transformation hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been moments of doubt, setbacks, and tears shed late at night when no one was watching. But there had also been breakthrough moments of pure innovation, the joy of building something meaningful, and the deep satisfaction of creating a workplace where everyone's contributions were valued. The lesson wasn't simply that I had prevailed against Marcus and TechVision. It was that by standing firm for the recognition I deserved, I had created space for others to do the same. By refusing to accept the erasure of my contributions, I had established a company where no one would suffer that indignity. Phoenix Health AI wasn't just successful by conventional metrics. It represented a new model of how technology companies could operate ethically, collaboratively, and with genuine concern for the human impact of their innovations. That was a victory far sweeter than any revenge could ever be. As I sit here tonight, completing this reflection, I'm struck by how differently things might have turned out if I hadn't read that contract clause, if I hadn't prepared meticulously, if I had simply accepted the role Marcus tried to assign me. Sometimes the most crucial turning points in our lives come disguised as our most painful moments. So, if you're facing your own professional betrayal or public humiliation, remember this document. Everything, know your worth, and never let someone else's narrative about you become your reality. The path forward may not be obvious immediately, but with persistence and integrity, you can transform even your worst moments into the foundation for something remarkable. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a professional setting? What strategies helped you maintain your dignity and rights? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with anyone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself isn't just right, it's sometimes the beginning of something better than you ever imagined. Thanks for listening to my story, and remember your contributions matter. Your ideas have value, and no one has the right to erase your work or your worth.